I have a panel of very distinguished guests, ambassadors, and Marko Savkovic here with me. There you are, Ambassador, good. So we have, obviously, Sam Fabrizi, His Excellency Sam Fabrizi, the European Union, represents the head of the delegation of the European Union. His Excellency Thomas Schieb, who is the ambassador of Germany. His Excellency Jean-Louis Falconi, which is the new ambassador of France. Welcome. This is one of your first, I would assume, panels. His Excellency Nikolaus Lutterotti, who's the ambassador of Austria. Good to see you. And Marko Savkovic, the program director of the Belgrade Fund for Political Excellence. Now, I was looking at the title of this panel, and let me start with that. And it says Southeast Europe, the Regional Stability Challenge. And when I saw that title, I thought to myself, is this something that I'm already heard before, like about maybe 2 decades ago, like in the year 2000, there's this challenge of stability. And somehow it struck me that, in a way, this very title tells us that we're sort of gone backwards a little bit in certain elements. And this comes at a time when things don't look that bright, no matter how they're not catastrophic, but they're certainly not bright, and stability is under challenge. And so, in this brief that I prepared for this, I was starting by saying, well, first of all, what we have is the problem of the Belgrade-Pristina talks, which have stalled, which actually ceased. They have to start again under totally different circumstances. We see the United States is coming in with 2 representatives in a way. One that was nominated, Matt Palmer, a couple of weeks ago, and then we had Gilner coming in as ambassador to Germany to deal with this issue. We hear that somebody else will be appointed, and this is stalled. And then when you think about why it had stalled, one of the reasons it has stalled is because the CEFTA that we heard about, that everybody is supporting here, somehow went down the drain in a second when the Kosovar Albanians put a tax on Serbian goods. And that in itself shows that in the meantime, there was not much that could be done about this by the European Union or the United States for that matter. And this, in a way, has put under question the credibility of the Union itself, I would say. And when our friend from the former panel talked about CEFTA Plus being a good idea, I was reminded of a phrase by Gandhi when they asked him about what he thought about Western civilization. He said, I think it's a good idea. Okay? And it somehow seems to be a matter of not being able to have the leverage to deal with certain important issues in the Western Balkans. That's one. The second thing is, obviously, as we discussed before, the pace of reform, how reform is being done, and the European Commission reports. We had talks about state capture, about crisis, and in this very moment, we're talking about a very tense situation in Montenegro between the opposition and the ruling party, boycotts in Albania, boycott potential in Serbia, things that don't look that well. And when we talk about reform and you hear about reform, somehow it seems that it's not just what the European Union is asking of us, it's what these countries are doing on their own. So in a lot of issues, it seems to me that a lot of them are dragging their feet in certain respects, and that things are not moving quick enough. On the other hand, there was the impression after the Sofia summit that somehow the accession process was taken off the agenda, and mostly this is aligned with President Macron, who said first we have to fix Europe first, and then we'll see later. And this has been somewhat watered down, but there's this impression that this whole thing is up in the air somehow. Concerning reform, I'm reminded of a joke I heard was when a Boy Scout comes home and he's all scratched up and beaten up and dirty, and his father asks him, what happened? And he said, you know, I'm a Boy Scout. I have to do a good deed every day. And he said, what's the problem with that? Well, what did you do today? And he said, well, I helped an old lady cross the street. So he says, what was so difficult about that? Well, she didn't want to cross. So there is actually resistance to reform also that is being sort of part of this whole atmosphere that we're discussing this in. And then finally, you know, the European Union somehow, or the West, sees the new players, China, Turkey, Russia, as some type of spoilers, and the reason is obviously that the relations between all of them have their own problems. And then finally, there is something that has been done, and that's the Berlin process, but somehow this has been going on, and we have a youth organization now with that, and we're talking about certain infrastructural projects and connectivity, but somehow it doesn't seem to have had much influence on the atmosphere in which all of this is going on. So I'm not going to try to give our panelists a hard time. Some of them had a hard talk experience with me in Koponik last year. I'm going to ask them what they think is the major problem in some of these issues, and I will start with the highest common denominator of the European Union, if I call him that way, and that is, of course, His Excellency Sam Fabrizi, who was already in this seat the last panel, so I know you said a lot of things that probably you will move on to something else and address some of these issues.
Yeah, thank you. It's always a pleasure to be with you and with a colleague. So try to respond to your question. I think you made a number of, as usual, a good point to where the problem is. Certainly, maybe rather than a security challenge, maybe I would call it or recall it a resilience challenge. I mean, that means probably 10 years afterward. You were mentioned 10 years ago. We are not in a traditional security challenge anymore. I think the whole buzzword right now is resilience, but certainly is what we as the European Union are doing in this part of Europe is to build the resilience, which is embed the democracy, embed security, embed prosperity, with the understanding that these elements are the element to uplift this part of Europe, is certainly putting on the same level playing field that the European Union has. Also because if you look, as you said, 10 years ago, your previous predecessor said, if we had this panel 10 years ago, it would have been completely different. We would not be talking about foreign direct investment or trade, or we will be talking really still about traditional security issues. The second element I would talk is certainly the leverage that you were talking about. So leverage is a fantastic word, but at the same time, I think we shouldn't also abuse the terms of leverage, especially if you talk a question of partnership. Leverage always gives you the impression that you impose on someone else a set of reform and a set of objective, and basically there's a giver and a taker. I think we have to move, as I said, from security to resilience, from leverage, or in traditional terms, leverage, to most partnership. The third element, I like it, is a Boy Scout, not because I was a Boy Scout, but certainly because it makes the sense, resistance to reform. And I think there's a need also in a deep introspection in each of the countries of the region to understand why this reform are going slowly. So what is the vested interest? What is the balance within this country? Why the reform cannot go faster and quicker? Certainly there's a question of our role, and certainly I wasn't particularly pessimistic after the Sofia summit. I think the Sofia summit was a sort of a reality check between Commission ambition, member state, where the member state were, and also where the six were. And I think if you look 1 year later, we are certainly in a much better position. There was the need to discuss. And certainly the conversation right now is much more concrete, much more real. And as I said before, I hope that in a couple of weeks' time there will be a response and on Macedonia and North Macedonia and Albania. Certainly, geopolitics is back to the region. Is this true? Or maybe it's more visible than before. It's something that we have to take into consideration. This is not an area where nothing has happened. I think there's a number of agendas. Sometimes these agendas are conflicting. But certainly is our ambition always to say that you join the EU because you want to join. Is a convergence for. It's not a convergence against somebody. Certainly, we are not interested to build system against somebody. We want to build system which is in line with what we like to do. Certainly, this is an element, and I will mention. And certainly, we also have to see that there's some knot in this region that need to be untied. And I think the Prespa agreement is given the clarity of how can you untie a knot, to political courage, to leadership, taking also some risk. But I think something that was not thinkable 10 years ago, or even only last year, has became possible. I think it was Gandhi who said, "Nothing seems possible until it happened." Because everything is impossible. Certainly, the Prespa agreement gave a recipe. Of course, there's a difference if for other leadership call in the region, even though it's difficult to make any similarity. But certainly the Pristina and Belgrade dialogue is the other, or is another big important part where we have to find an understanding of how this normalization can be achieved. And certainly the EU will use its own means and way. Sometimes leverage is needed, but more in the sense of, as I said before, should be own and sustainable. It's not something that will be in a top-down exercise. So I would say leverage, resilience, resistance to reform, and how to apply political leadership for the better good. That will be my reply to your question.
Thank you. I'm going to move on to His Excellency Jean-Louis Falconi, who is relatively new, so he gets the microphone first after Ambassador Fabrizi. And let me ask you, perhaps you can clarify some of this position of France concerning the accession. You know, this was in the news. You know, things were being said. You know, some people think that basically the priority was internal European reform, and we'll see about accession later, et cetera, et cetera. I'm sure you're very well informed about all this. So let's see some of your reaction. And perhaps, even though you're new, what do you identify as some of the major problems in terms of regional stability here, and how you see maybe a path forward?
Thank you very much. Well, I may say a few things that would sound to you, I mean, I've only been here for a month, so I may say a few things that would sound to you as obvious, but let's say that you first need to open your eyes, see what's going on, see what is underway, and also what my country believes for the region and for this country. The first thing I know is that, I quoted the challenge of the title is regional stability. And a lot of people, since I've been here in Belgrade, tell me precisely about the fact of course, you support stability, which is a way to say that you don't really take care of us, and there is this kind of, I've heard this many times, antagonism between our support, let's say generally the Western support for stability in opposition to democracy. And to me it seems a bit strange because stability does not mean immobilism or does not mean conservatism. It does not mean the absence of any evolution in the political scene and social fields. I mean, it's a very it's a very subtle balance, and stability for us is an inclusive framework, meaning at the same time democracy, so it includes democracy, but also security and economic social development. And you can't have stability without all these elements to put together in a very complex way. And sometimes some of them challenge. I mean, you could say, for instance, that we had social demonstrations in France, very strong last year. It prevented our president to come here for the first time. He was supposed to come here. Is France a stable country? Do we have democracy? So, I mean, all these elements go together. It's a constant challenge between economic development, social developments, security, democracy. So I wouldn't oppose stability to democracy and saying that the Europeans, because I've been addressed as a European, support stability, which means that they don't care what's going on. They support conservatism. And to us, it's not true. So this is what I wanted to say. Then, what my country believes about this region. I mean, Mr. Macron's visit in July was precisely the moment to say, we want to be present in the region. This is not a region where you have to believe that it is for the others. You are European, there is a very strong interlinked history, and so many things remind me of that as far as France is concerned when I'm here in Belgrade. I mean, but this happened 100 years ago, and we want to build that for the future. So Macron's coming here in July was the very strong commitment to say that we, France, and I say France, but also France as a member of the EU, want to be part of what's going on in the region and want to be actors of the region. So we have a strategy for the region, which is a new element for the region. And it encompasses a lot of different elements. So in terms of bilateral action, I can tell you a lot of things. We've got the Agence Française de Développement, who is settling here, which is going to be a very powerful instrument to help for development of projects on sustainable development, governance issues, gender equality. And this is a newcomer in the region. This will have a regional impact. We also have, and I have to say, in our embassy, an interagency center of expertise who is coordinated by a diplomat and who comprises a regional liaison judge in charge of all the countries of the region, regional customs attaché, an expert in small arms and light weapon,